I'm Veronica. I am an Indonesian human rights lawyer in self-imposed exile in Australia because of my West Papua work. I recently joined Amnesty International Australia. So before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that if you are listening from Australia and or Aotearoa, New Zealand, then you are sitting on stolen land. I am sitting on the land of Gadigal people of Eora Nation. And on behalf of Amnesty Australia, I'd like to pay respect to the traditional custodians of the land, and also the elders past and present. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Always was, always will be Maori land. Always was, always will be West Papuan land. Our speakers today are Rode Wanimbo, an Indigenous West Papuan woman, Lydia Thorpe, Indigenous Aboriginal woman, Tere Harrison, an Indigenous Maori woman. I will introduce more each of them before they start speaking. Thank you for our distinguished speakers today for your generosity in sharing your knowledge with us today. We are very respectful of the information that we will gain today. So as a brief introduction, yesterday, the UN put out a statement on the current humanitarian crisis in West Papua, which includes an estimation between 60 to 100,000 of displacement, torture, killings, including children, and enforced disappearance. This year, Jakarta is forcing through the plan to create new provinces in West Papua. And West Papuans, many regard this as a divide and rule tactics, and it will become pulling factor for more migrants to come, which will lead to further dispossession and marginalization. And it will also worsen the militarization in West Papua, because new province means new military and police headquarters, and not just one in each province. And so our speakers will share their experiences of dispossession and also analyze the dispossession in Papua. First, we will hear from the West Papuan speaker, then the Maori speaker, then Aboriginal speaker, then question and answers, then our Papuan speaker will make the closing statement. So the floor is now for, sorry, got distracted by message. Rode Wanimbo, she's a Lani and Walak woman. She's the head of Women Department of Gidi Church. She frequently visited and provide healings in for the displaced West Papuans in the camps, which are mostly in the forest, and we can hear more from her directly. So please, Rode, the floor is yours.
Wakagak, Avreniki, Nombomini, Nogolomini, Wa. Greetings from the land of West Papua. I acknowledge the traditional custodian of Mambramo Tami land on which I live and work. I pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and truly appreciate this wonderful collaboration of Amnesty International. I want to start our conversation by presenting 3 minutes videos. It is a glimpse of ongoing military operation, which has been increased in the last 3 years, especially in the highland regions of West Papua. Please let us see the video.
Aku tinggal bungit mun ada kabut mun no ikma. Aku tinggal bau mah. Dok yo pelen. Wah. Mama yung hero. Ibelel bu eni kemeo.
Thank you, Daniela. Yeah, this military operation cost approximately, as Veronica have mentioned before, that this military operation cost almost approximately 60,000 of internally displaced people and extrajudicial killings, arbitrary tortured, and no access for health and education, especially for the children. And many women spend sleepless nights due to the death of their husbands and children. But the women, they have to wake up every morning. They have to work. They have to find food for their family, for their relatives, for the people at the shelter to survive. So I truly respect all the mothers of West Papuan who playing a very significant role in this such a crimes against humanity. And as I'm speaking today, hundreds of West Papuan are living in the jungle along the way to the border of Papua New Guinea. These are the impacts of the state policies that are driven by systemic racism and economic interest. I would like to share what actually triggers the dispossession in the land of West Papua. To me personally, the first one is the greed of the colonizer. When we talk about dispossession, in Papua context, it cannot be separated with the imperial project in global politics. I want to focus more on three main historical events, which shows the political conspiracy that driven by economic interest, which have led to the human rights violation to the right of the self-determination of Papuan. 1962, the New York Agreement. Actually, the USA wanted the wealth of Mount Nemangkawi. They want to obtain it. That's why they conspired with the Indonesian government to obtain the wealth of the mountain. So they initiated, under the Kennedy administration, they initiated the New York Agreement to facilitate the transfer of power over West Papua from the Netherlands to Indonesia. And then in 1967, 2 years before the UN sanctioned process of determining Papua political status, Freeport-McMoran, the largest mining company, have the business contract with Indonesian government without any involvement of the Angmume, the indigenous West Papuan who owned the Mount Memangkawi. And then in 1969, what so-called Act of Free Choice, which is actually for us indigenous West Papuan, it is act of no choice, because the mechanism was against the international democratic principle, one person, one vote. But unfortunately, the United Nations rubber stamped the process. This is it's very sad. And the second thing for me, what triggers dispossession in West Papua is the use of the security approach. When Indonesia invaded West Papua, protests were raised and held in various forms in many regions in West Papua. To silence the protest and resistance, the Indonesian government sent the security forces. So we have Biak massacre, Wasior massacre, Paniai, and also in 1977, there was a mass killing in my village named Kelela. Many women were raped. 2 of my aunties were raped by the member of Indonesian army. And the third is migrant bias development or racist policies. I want to ask Sister Daniela to present the picture. This is we are going to see a picture of Ina Kunume. This is a home setting in a community of the Lani, a tribe which belongs to my father. From this picture, we can see clearly that we are people who living with harmony. All the families in that community know each other, talk and making decisions together from generation to generation, that Papuan had been living in harmony with the nature and also with the other living creatures. So we do have a traditional belief system. We do have values, for example, values of Nore Kore, sisterhood, brotherhood, values of Nabua Kabua, means loving and caring. We do have values of Nabukme Kabukme. It's about togetherness, unity, and empowerment. But when the colonizer arrived in the land of Papua, I hope this picture, it's just the same, but I draw it, it's not as good as the picture. But when the colonizer arrived in the land of Papua, they view West Papuan as uncivilized. These people are godless. These people are primitive, savage, and all the labels that they've given to West Papuans. Our traditional attire were viewed as a symbol of backwardness, as a poverty, and also we were introduced to stay in a new form of house and to have to wear a certain clothes, and we have to learn Indonesia history and Indonesia language become the compulsory subject in a formal education from the primary up to university. So Reverend Benigiai, moderator of West Papua Council of Churches, he said that Papuan had been Indonesianized by all the migrant biased policies, all the development program that introduced by the central government. For example, transmigration. The second president of Indonesia, Suharto, who was ruled for 32 years, he implemented this transmigration program in the land of West Papua. So thousands of people from Java, Sulawesi are brought and settled in the land of Papua. Hectares of land were given to them to settle. So the narrative, the state narrative, the aim of this program is to teach West Papuan to cultivate the land. Well, my grandparents, my ancestors have been living for thousands of years. They know how to cultivate the land. They have their own traditional agriculture system. And we do also have Operasi Koteka. It is forceful removal of koteka. It's a traditional attire for the men, especially in the highlands. So because, as I mentioned before, it was symbol of poverty and backwardness. And hectares of sago forest. Sago is a staple food for the people in the coastal area. Hectares of sago forest replaced by the rice field and oil palm plantation. And then we are powerless to avoid or to do the resistance, because this is a government program, and protecting the military make sure that this program should be implemented in the grassroots. And then I also want to share that Els Rieke Katmo, she is a West Papuan woman scholar. She also said that one of the form of dispossession that experienced by West Papuan is the limiting the access for Papuan to create the production of the indigenous knowledge through researchers. It is very difficult for the indigenous West Papuan scholars to get fund to do the research, to do the indigenous knowledge research. And then special autonomy law, without any evaluation. Last year on July, when Papua People's Assembly, when they want to have the hearing process with the grassroots, it was banned. It was banned, and it was supported by security forces, so that without any evaluation, the special autonomy law approved for another 20 years. And then the situation this year will getting worse by the 3 new provinces that not introduced but forcefully approved by the central government. I think it creates this is how colonialism is justified by the narrative in civilizing the West Papuan, civilizing West Papuan by all these programs. And it will, through the 3 new provinces, it will open more opportunity for the non-Papuan to come to West Papua. And then we not only become marginalized, but I'm so sad because we will be the stranger in our own land. So to end this conversation, I want to share that that disposition, that experience by West Papuan, it's not only disposition towards the living space and the existence of the Papuan itself, but disposition towards the source of life. Because for us, the land, the river, the forest, the mountain, it's not a natural resources. That's our source of life. So the disposition that has been happening in West Papua towards our source of life. And then also it's not only toward our physical body, our land, our mountain, but the disposition towards our belief system, our indigenous knowledge, and our richness, the beauty, the uniqueness of our culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kakak Rode, for sharing the knowledge, history, and pain with us. Now let's go to Tere Harrison. She's a Ngati Poro and Ngati Kahungunu woman. She's an activist and filmmaker. Please, Tere, the floor is yours.
Kia ora, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, he honore he korore ki te atua, he maunga rongo ki te whenua, he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. We send a words of peace to all in these challenging times. I'd like to start off by thanking Amnesty International, both Australia and New Zealand, for organising this opportunity. But mostly I'd like to thank, acknowledge our, what we call tuakana, our seniors, who for Māori are the Aboriginal peoples and people of Melanesia. We consider ourselves Māori as much, much younger siblings in the Indigenous forest of knowledge. And so I acknowledge our seniors, Rode and Lydia. A honour and pleasure to speak with you this evening. Thank you for your work and for your sharing of your knowledge. Before I move further, I just wanted to acknowledge, particularly in Aotearoa, some of the key activist movements who support West Papua, namely West Papua Action Aotearoa, Mairi Leadbetter, Brian Turner and Catherine Delahunty, along with Peace Movement in Aotearoa and Edwina Hughes, but also to acknowledge the Indigenous networks throughout the world who support West Papua, particularly through the Pacific. The Pacific have been leaders of voice in this space through the Pacific Leaders Forum. And so I acknowledge the work that the Pacific leaders have done in this space. I particularly want to acknowledge the fabulous Young Solwara group of Fiji and the Pacific, the generations of the saltwater, who continue to carry the messages of West Papua, who continue to raise the stories and the voices of West Papua in all platforms, through people such as mentors to us in Aotearoa, Teresia Te Aiwa, Emalani Case, Leilani Salisa, Palamolisa, and even into Australia and some of our cobbers like and Anthony Brennan, Ants. These are some of the important voices around the world who unify like we are this evening to endorse and support West Papua. We have had the pleasure to host members, peoples of West Papua and Aotearoa over many years, who have shared their stories with us. The role of my time this evening is to share a glimpse into the dispossession for Māori, but also to affirm our solidarity and what we can do to support West Papua. So mostly I will focus my attention to what we can do to support West Papua, particularly from an Indigenous Māori perspective. I wanted to discuss briefly the dispossession of Māori because the Indigenous story for Māori is similar, resonates through all Indigenous peoples. It's a story we know. And we can't discuss this dispossession without discussing colonisation. So our expert in international Indigenous law here, traditional Māori knowledge holder and elder of ours, Moana Jackson, says colonisation is the violent denial of the right of Indigenous peoples to continue governing themselves in their own lands. Colonisation is a process of dispossession and control. And just to note, colonisation is not a past tense, it's an ongoing tense, it's a present tense. Nobody got on a plane and left and took, the colonials did not leave and take colonial systems with them. No, we have to live through this. We continue to live through this. We are colonised, and we are a people who are searching and demanding our rights as Indigenous peoples who are dispossessed on our lands. And that is a situation that we see for all Indigenous peoples around the world. This evening is about acknowledging that for West Papua. The brutality and the annexing of their sovereignty, their political, their economical, their cultural, their spiritual right to govern themselves, to live as themselves. And nobody knows that story better than Indigenous peoples. And so we raise our voices. We need to raise our voices in support of this. When I touch the waters here in Aotearoa, as a Pacific person, I know that I am touching the waters in West Papua. So we're not just Indigenous peoples, we are connected. I know that when I immerse myself in waters here, and our waters here, I am touching your people in West Papua, because we are all connected by ocean. And this occurs throughout the ocean peoples, the Pacific, around the world. We are connected this way. And so my message for the peoples of West Papua is we need to remember our connections. We need to remember our Indigenous connections. For through these ancestral, ancient connections, it is not just West Papuan who fight and suffer, but it is Indigenous peoples around the world. We have limited time, so I'm going to move forward because while we discuss the disposition of Māori, there's some very important messages that I wanted to bring. The current Minister of Foreign Affairs in Aotearoa is an Indigenous woman, a woman that we regard highly. Her name is Nanaia Mahuta. And yesterday we saw, you may have seen, she spoke at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Switzerland. She spoke on the Russian military invasion of Ukraine, which of course she should rightfully do. But we have a message to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, to our relation Nanaia. You described it as a blatant act of a bully, brutally using its unbridled power to achieve goals at odds with international law. We note you also rightfully highlighted the severe impacts on women and children, victims of this illegal aggression, and they should not be tolerated. But Minister Mahuta, if you were to substitute the names of Russia for Indonesia and Ukraine for West Papua, you would be describing the illegal invasion of Indonesia into West Papua as a blatant act of a bully, brutally using its unbridled power to achieve goals at odds with international law. And yes, Minister, you would be describing the severe impacts on the women and children, the victims of this illegal aggression, and it should not be tolerated. Yesterday, you laid down the position of the New Zealand government on protecting human rights, and you called for countries to permit meaningful and unfettered access to UN experts and other independent observers into the Ukraine and Russia. Minister Mahuta, yesterday you asked that the UN Human Rights Council exhaust every effort for diplomacy in pursuing universal human rights. And so, Minister, to uphold the New Zealand government's pledge in 2019 to support a UN human rights fact-finding mission to West Papua, a pledge sought by the Pacific Forum leaders, strong actions by yourself and Pacific nations could help to ensure this mission goes forward. Minister, he tika tō titiro ki uhia. Te inoi nei kia hoku ai te rongo ki te whenua West Papua. Minister, you are right to draw attention to the atrocities in Ukraine. But we also ask that you support the peaceful restoration of sovereignty and independence to the people of West Papua. If we do not, there will be no future beneath such brutality. In ending, there is a lot that Aotearoa should do. The UN Human Rights Fact-Finding Mission should be a priority because New Zealand government pledged to do this, and it has not been done. Highlighting the imprisonment of Victor Yomo should be a case that the New Zealand government should push with the Indonesian government. And the New Zealand government military has ties with Indonesia. And this harms us and shames me that this still continues. So these are some of the calls that we ask the New Zealand government to address when addressing West Papua. I too wish that West Papua, that Rode has full time to discuss the issues of West Papua, but these are some of the issues that Aotearoa, that New Zealand, that Māori should sit on the table for our government, for our country, for my countrymen, in support of West Papua's plight. How can I say this, Rode? E tangi ana taku ngākau. Our hearts weep for the women, the children, and the peoples of West Papua because we know what you are experiencing, whether it is from the Dutch, whether it is from the Indonesians. As Indigenous peoples, we know. Veronica, I don't have anything further to add. I just prefer to leave as much time as possible to hear from Lydia and Rode.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tara. It was very powerful. I was just so stunned when you suddenly transferred it back to me. Thank you so much for that. Next, we will hear from Lydia Thorpe, a Jab Warangane Gande Chimara woman. She's the first Aboriginal senator for Victoria. She's a human rights and climate and forest activist. Please, Lydia. Oh, you're
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Wow. The energy cut this session out. That's the power of Black women. And it's the power of, you know, what we've all been through and what we're all still going through. It's the violence of colonization that wants to break us. It's the violence of colonization that destroys our families, our children, our men, and our land and our water and our sky. This is the violence of colonization. And I didn't really want to take up too much time because I think, you know, my sisters have said exactly what needs to be said. Only we've got 240 years of experience. And 240 years later, it's become so sophisticated that you don't even realise it's happening half the time. You know, we've got 20,000 Aboriginal children in out-of-home care in 2022 in this country. We have ridiculously high incarceration rates. We have a 50% rise in suicide rates just in my own state. And I'm not going to bore you with the statistics. I think that's up to our audience to look that up and do their own homework and start decolonising themselves. And I live on Wurundjeri country. I'm a Japarang, Brabralang, Gunai Gunichimara, Kirewarang, I mean, my connections are so far and wide on my country that that's a lot of responsibility as a Black matriarch. And I'm really privileged and honoured to be with you both here tonight, because you think you're one out, beg your pardon. I've had a few events today, so I'm just exhausted, because we're always explaining our existence. You know, we're facing a climate catastrophe because they don't listen to us. We're facing a humanity crisis because they don't listen to us. And you already heard crime against humanity. You know, that still happens in this country every day. Happens to our old people locked up in aged care facilities, happens to our people seeking asylum who are locked up in hotels. And to see what's happening on your country, sister, and you being part of Healing Women, that gave me hope amongst all the trauma that we face every day as Black women. Because it's not just the jobs we do, right? It's also the people we are and how that affects us as Black women and our children and our cousins and our mums and our sisters. We still have a responsibility for all of those matriarchs amongst our own clans and our own community, and that's an enormous responsibility in itself, let alone fighting the colonizer every day. Sis, you talked about the greed of the colonizer. Look at the weather events we're facing today. That is the greed of the colonizer. You talked about human rights violations and self-determination. 240 years later, my sister, we're still fighting for that. And I'm not saying you're going to wait 240 years, but I want to say that you have First Nations women, Indigenous women, however we identify ourselves, the first people of our lands and our waters and our sky. You have us, you have them. And that's where we have to unite. And I will say thank you to Amnesty for connecting us, because this is what we need more of. This is an international movement. And Indigenous First Nations people around the world have been violated, are continuing to be violated. And it doesn't stop for anybody, even those with a treaty. It hasn't stopped. So I just want to say thank you to the leaders at Amnesty and all those deadly activists for allowing this conversation to happen. But what I also heard there was about learning, you know, decolonising is learning our own language. It's about, our culture is about loving. It's about caring. It's about unity. It's about empowerment. Can you imagine a politician that had those flavours? It just, you know, that's a scorecard for every politician in the federal freaking parliament that I have to work in that absolutely don't even understand those 4 basic principles of how we survive, how we continue to survive. Love, care, unity, empowerment. Sister, thank you for giving me those words, because it's so basic. And we want everyone around the globe, particularly in this country, to understand those 4 elements of what we should be as a society. You know, you talked about mining, you talked about no consent for mining. We're still fighting that here. Our fight is so, it's a mirror image. It's different eras, but it's the same. And that's what we have to destroy. The colonial mindset that these people in power have, that is not just hurting First Nations people, but is hurting our environment, and it's hurting their own people. We're seeing very wealthy people being flooded right now in a flood zone. Blackfellas never would have set up camp there. Speak to the people, you know. And so finally, I just want to say, you know, remembering our connections is what I heard that resonated with me, and that we have enough Indigenous people, First Nations people around the world, plus our allies, to take this over. And we have to take the opportunity now, because we're all in trouble. We're all still struggling, but the time is now. And I'm with you both 100%. And whatever I can do, you tell me and I will be there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. That was so powerful. And look at Kakak Rode, she just could feel the power, yeah. Indeed, and I think given the time, we can only have one question before Rode will wrap up and give the closing statement as a West Papuan. Okay, so the question is, how is best for communities at grassroots level in Australia to support financially and otherwise the campaign for a free West Papua on the ground in West Papua? So I think that question is for Rode. Let me copy paste the questions to you, Rode. Hang on.
It's okay. You can just. I already listened to the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. I thought it was too long. Okay.
Thank you very much for the willingness and to stand in solidarity. As Indigenous West Papuan, what I want to say, the first thing that we need is your time to listen. So thank you very much for, I would like to take this opportunity to really appreciate Amnesty International to create this space for us Indigenous women to listen to each other. Thank you. The important thing is you, after you listen our stories through this webinar, it is very important for you to share what we have been experienced with your family, with your communities. And I really appreciate your generosity to offer support financially. As a women coordinator of Indigenous Church in West Papua, we are, one of our priority program is facilitating a workshop for trauma healing. And we just, the Gidi women team just came back from Duga after running the workshop. So yeah, we will have, keep in touch, and then I will share the needs of the workshop to be continued, not only in Duga, but in Tanjaya, in Kiwirok, in Ilaga, in Pegunungan Bintang. There are 7 to 9 regions that really need trauma healing, safe space for the women, especially just to listen, just to tell their stories, because they have a lot of stories that they need somebody else to listen to them. So I appreciate your generosity. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Rode was just the areas that Rode mentioned are all impacted by armed conflict. Well, the armed conflict is taking place in those areas, and the subsequent tens of thousands of displacement of people. Okay.
Can I just add to that?
Sure, Lydia.
I just want to add to that and think about your next trip to Bali, Aussies. You know, Aussies love Bali. Think about that. Think about what you're contributing to. That's all.
Thanks, Lydia. And I think we just have enough time for Rode to give a closing statement.
Wah, kia ora, Sister Tere. I don't know the right word to greet you, Sister Lydia. Wah from the land of West Papua. I do really value this process. Listening to each other's story, to me, we are weaving yum. Yum, our traditional bag that I wear, yum is a symbol of life. It's a symbol of hope. So I really value listening to your stories, listening to each other. We are actually weaving hope, developing hope, and we are joining our energy to keep the flame burning. So thank you very much. I really look forward to have your email address to learn more from you, to keep in touch from you, to get positive energy, so that I can gain hope in this hopeless situation. And I really appreciate all the participants. Thank you very much for give your time to listen to us. We are not really facing the oppressive system of Indonesian rule, but we are facing the modern Pharaoh, the modern Goliath. We are facing the countries that have power. So as West Papuan, I really want to say that we really need your true solidarity. Thank you very much for brothers and sisters in Australia who support us through the Make West Papua Safe campaign. Every time I saw your action, it's give me hope. So thank you very much. Thank you also for all the brothers and sisters in Pacific that mentioned by Sister Tere. Thank you so much. It's like a drink of fresh water to keep walking in this long journey for peace and for justice. Thank you very much. Please use your privilege to amplify our voices. And I want to finish by, let me quote what Bernard Narakobi said in his book, The Melanesian Way. Our history did not begin with the contact with the Western explorer. Our civilization did not start with the coming of the Christian missionaries. Because we have an ancient civilization, it is important for us to give proper dignity and place to our history. Wah, wah, wah.
Wah, wah, wah. Thank you, Kakak Rode. Thank you so much for all the participants today, especially the very powerful, inspiring Black women. I feel personally very, very honored to have this opportunity, and also Amnesty Australia, and this collaboration between Amnesty International Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Indonesia. So we are on behalf of 3 organizations. I thank all the speakers and participants today. And yep, I will link up the speakers today in email. So let's keep in touch, and thank you so much, everyone. The recording today will be uploaded to Amnesty Australia's YouTube channel, so you can, as what Rode said, please share the message to your family and friends. Thank you.